Okay, go ahead.
The AAPOR Heritage Interview Series was initiated as a way to preserve knowledge about the founding of the public opinion research profession, the development of new ideas that have had a lasting impact on the work we do, and the growth of AAPOR itself. Since May 2002, the Heritage Interview Committee has systematically identified many individuals who have made significant contributions to our field. Several interviews have already been conducted. Today we're honored to meet with Harry O'Neill, a well-known and respected researcher whose career began in the 1950s and has encompassed a very diverse and fascinating experiences in the field of survey research. Harry has contributed greatly to the field. AAPOR knows Harry as a leader in public opinion research and as one of our most honest and open colleagues, always ready to share experiences, knowledge, and ideas with others. He has been a valuable teacher and mentor not only to students in the classes he has taught, but also to those of us lucky enough to have worked with him on the job or through AAPOR. Harry has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Colgate University, a master's degree in clinical psychology from Pennsylvania State University, and has done additional graduate work in educational psychology at Rutgers University. He served in the Air Force as a clinical psychologist before beginning his research career in 1957. Harry, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today.
My pleasure.
Would you start by telling us a little bit about how you got into research?
Purely by chance. When I was in college, one never majored in survey research or public opinion research. And after I got out of the Air Force, I decided not to pursue a career in clinical psychology, so I had a variety of jobs. The last one in the 3 years between leaving the Air Force and getting into research was selling life insurance, or trying to. I wasn't really all that successful. So just before I got fired, I quit my job, and I was looking in the New York Times, and I found an ad for a researcher in Prudential Insurance Company. So I knew nothing about research, but I knew something about insurance. So I applied for that job, was lucky enough to get it, and that's where I began to learn about survey research. We did a lot of research at Prudential for the insurance industry. We followed people's money and how they had it invested, why they bought insurance, how much insurance they bought, what needs they thought their insurance would cover, and what needs they thought it wouldn't cover, so new policies might be developed. I left there after 5 years because I really got tired of just dealing with the insurance industry and insurance products, liked the research, and wanted to broaden my vista, as it was. And interestingly, my next job was gotten through an ad in a paper, too. I had friends working in Princeton, and after dinner one Sunday afternoon, I sat down in their living room with my sturdy after-dinner drink, picked up a copy of the Princeton Packet, and there was a blind ad for a researcher. So I answered it. It turned out to be Opinion Research Corporation, and I got the job there as a junior researcher in 1962. And kind of liked Opinion Research Corporation because I spent 25 and a half years there, from a junior researcher to when I left in 1988 as the vice chairman.
And where did you go from there?
I went there. I had met Bud Roper through AAPOR, and I had met Jay Wilson, who was Bud's boss, through AAPOR, and I approached them to see if it was possible for me to get a job at Roper. It was a job I needed because I quit ORC without having a job, and luckily both of them knew me, liked me, and hired me, and I spent almost 18 years with Roper and its various subsequent companies as it was merged more than once. And it was a wonderful, wonderful career at both ORC and Roper. The thing I liked most about it was the variety. We worked with all kinds of clients and all kinds of products, and you never got bored like I was getting bored at Prudential because all you did was deal with insurance products. Here you never had a chance to be bored because every day a new client or a new problem or a new product or a new issue came along to study.
Stand by. Go ahead.
Your research experience has covered many types of research. What are the areas you've enjoyed most?
Well, as I said, it was extremely varied. I think the three areas I most enjoyed was political research. And while I didn't do a lot of it, what I did in it was very, very interesting. I also worked very heavily in the area of public policy research. And the subset of that was advocacy research for clients who wanted to advocate a particular position on an issue. And then the latter part of my career, almost the whole time I was with Roper, and I started a few years before with ORC, doing litigation research for major law firms, basically in the areas of false or misleading advertising and trademark confusion. And that was fascinating too, because every product you worked on was different than the one before. And so you had a lot of exposure to a lot of different products and a lot of different lawyers who were really great clients.
Would you tell us more about some of the political research you've done?
Well, basically there were two political campaigns that were very, very interesting. The first one was started in 1963 when Goldwater was the Republican candidate for president. We did all of Goldwater's primary research, and then after the convention I spent a very nervous night hoping that he would be the nominee of the party, and hoping that he was, of course, and hoping that we'd then be hired to keep doing the research throughout the presidential campaign. It turned out very well. He got the nomination, and we got the job of doing all of Goldwater's research through the presidential campaign. And that was really very, very interesting work. There was a whole new group of people then that we were working with, the people that he hired to run his presidential campaign, none of whom had any experience with nationwide campaigns, and they didn't have much experience either with research, because basically they were not the people we were primarily working for during the primary. And we did work, my boss and I went to Washington every other Sunday to present the results of the surveys to the campaign committee, the head of the committee and the head of the Republican National Committee, and so forth. And there was a lot of work, of course, and we weren't as technologically oriented as we are today. We didn't have the same kind of computers. Everything was a lot slower, and you had to work a lot faster because of that, and work late at night to get the data out. If you finished your interviewing on a Saturday, you had to be down in Washington with the results on a Sunday, and so it was very, very intense, but very, very much fun, and enjoyed that very, very much. One of the interesting things was that when we did our first baseline study after the convention, that was a big study of 3,000 people nationwide. We asked an awful lot of questions, a lot of demographics, a lot of issue questions, and then every 2 weeks we do a smaller study where we had the background of all these people because we paneled these people. And we would draw from the 3,000 a panel, a subset to interview every 2 weeks. So we would focus on different issues instead of everything every time. And the first study we did, the results of the trial heat were like 60% for Johnson and 40% for Goldwater. And as it ended, they used to tell us not to worry, though, we're going to win this election, because all the Goldwater supporters are out there somewhere in the woodwork. They're really afraid to tell you they're Goldwater supporters because of all the bad publicity he was getting. So they're going to come out of the woodwork and they're going to vote for him come November. Well, when we did our last survey prior to the November election, the results were still 60% for Johnson and 40% for Goldwater. And I remember my boss, Tom Benham, saying to them at the end of that meeting, because they had one more survey scheduled. And Tom looked at him and said, "Gentlemen, it was 60-40 after the convention. It's 60-40 now. We don't think you ought to pay us or anybody else to do another survey. Save your money and have a party." They took that advice, and we did not do any more surveys. And I don't know whether they had a party or not, but it was good advice, because when the election came out, it was a landslide for Johnson. The only interesting thing was that there were 20% of the people undecided. And Goldwater's campaign was a good campaign in that he overwhelmingly captured most of that 20%. The problem is he could have captured it all and still lost the election. But the campaign itself did make an inroad into those people who were subject to change.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Nixon?
The next work we did was we were hired in '68, which was Nixon's first run, to do his research for the 1968 campaign. We did every 2 weeks we did a survey during the campaign on a different issue. Again, we started out with a baseline survey, but we also divided the country up. We did certain studies throughout the whole country. We also focused on certain states or groups of states. And we had, again, baseline studies, so when we did subsequent studies, we didn't have to go into all the demographics of that because we had them. And every 2 weeks we did a survey. But in those days, unlike now, the pollster did not meet directly with the president, wasn't in Washington as part of the in-group. It was more that you were really an outside third party, an objective outside third party. You weren't appearing on television and promoting your candidate as they do today. We reported to Haldeman and Ehrlichman and some of the other people there, and a gentleman named David Dirge, who was with Southern Illinois University. Southern Illinois University. He was our go-between between ourselves and the people in Washington. We did the reports. We went over them with David. We sent them into Haldeman, and David also was there to explain them. So it was a lot different than today, where the pollster is right part of the inner circle. Anyway, he won the election in '68, and they kept us on to poll all during his 4 years then in the White House. And we polled every 2 weeks on issues, whatever the issues were. But unlike what I understand was part of the Clinton administration, when he had research done, research was done to tell him what to say and what to do. We never did that. Nixon did not use the research to make his decisions. He made his decisions, and we did the research to see basically how they were being accepted by the public. If they were being accepted very well, he could go out and talk to the public in one way. If the research showed that his decisions were not being accepted by the public, he would talk to the public to try to get them and convince them to come over to his point of view. So I think it was totally different than it has been subsequently. Then after the 72, or then after in 72 he ran again, and we then did primary work for him, and we also did polling for the next 2 years, from 72 to 74, when he had to resign. And during this campaign in 72, we worked with Dick Worthland and Bob Teeter. We divided up the states. ORC did the eastern states, Bob Teeter did the Midwest, and Dick Worthland, whose company then was Decision Making, did the western states. And that was very interesting because we all did questionnaires where we had a lot of the same questions. But in individual states, we had specific questions. But the questionnaires were all set up the same. Questions 1 through 10, everybody might ask, and then from 10 to 15, there might be 5 questions different in different states. But it was all set up so in the data processing part, the same questions had the same question numbers, and it made data processing very easy and very fast. And that was something quite new at that time. And so we polled again every 2 weeks until he decided to resign. They were very good to work for, unlike people might think. They did press releases, but we wrote the press releases and submitted them. And they reviewed them, and they would discuss them with us if there was something they wanted changed, but we would not let them cherry pick the data or leave important data out or anything like that. We said, this is the press release as we want. That's the way it should be run. And they did. They did one of two things. They ran the release just as we wrote it, or they decided not to run the release at all. But they were very, very good to work for, very decent and very honest to work for, which people thought was a little strange when they knew what Nixon's problems were and how he was not behaving all the time that ethically. But they handled us very, very ethically. It was a fine relationship.
And what were some of your experiences with other kinds of public policy research?
Well, the public policy research covered a wide variety of issues. You name the issue, and we probably did interview on it, not only for Nixon, but for different groups. I remember Jesse Helms, Senator Helms, was a big conservative Democrat from Texas, and he had a lot of different committees that were interested in different issues. He had a committee on the Panama Canal, I remember, and on other things, and he hired us to do a lot of research. And there again, we insisted that we had to write the questions. They could review them, they could make suggestions, but they really had to be our work and not theirs. And they would ask questions that had factual information in it. And we knew that once a release came out, you would be challenged because not everybody was going to like the results of the research. And somebody's ox is always gored when you do public policy research. But we made them show us the backup data for any factual statements they wanted to make in the questioning, so that if we were challenged once the research came out, we knew where we stood and we could back up everything we did with solid facts. So we didn't let them get away with anything. I remember one very interesting study. The Business Roundtable had us do a study for, there was a move on foot to create a consumer protection agency in the federal government. And the Business Roundtable, which were the big executives of Fortune 500 companies and so forth, were opposed to that. So they asked us to do some research to find out what the public's reaction would be to a government agency in the consumer protection field. And one of the questions we asked was something like, are you in favor or opposed to a consumer protection agency to do thus and so, in addition to all the things that are already in place in the government? That's not the exact wording, but that's the essence of it. And people said, we don't need any more government agencies. There's enough there to protect the consumer. We don't want to develop another protection agency or any other government agency. Well, there were people who didn't like that. And Carol Tucker Foreman was then head of the Consumer Federation of America or something like that. and she took us to task for loading the question, saying that, of course, if you say that this is to be on top of all the other government agencies, you're loading it. You're telling people you want government expanded. And this was very, very difficult for her to swallow, and she took us to task. As a matter of fact, and I think this is the interesting thing, she reported us to AAPOR, and AAPOR had just set up their ethics and their standards and just developed a committee to investigate. And so I was the first case that AAPOR's ethics committee investigated for doing unethical research. And they investigated it, and the committee found me guilty. Not guilty of deliberately loading something, but inadvertently asking a loaded question. And there was only one dissenting vote, and I remember that was Ithiel de Solapool from MIT, who said, that's nonsense. He was fine. He didn't load it. It was not unethical. And I cooperated with AAPOR. I gave him everything. But nonetheless, I was their first case to be investigated, and they found me guilty of that. Subsequently, I remember doing a study about the B-1 bomber, and we found out that people were kind of okay with a B-1 bomber, and we put the study out to our client, who ran full-page ads in the newspaper about how the country was supporting the B-1 bomber. And I think the question wording included the name of the Secretary of Defense or something like that, who was supporting this position. And the people who complained to AAPOR about that research said that if you put the name of a very well-known or prestigious person in the questionnaire, that's going to load it, and people are going to say, well, if the Secretary of Defense wants to do this, why not? And so AAPOR came to me again to investigate me, and at that time they came to my office to meet with me, and I had a lawyer at the other end of the table, and they said something to me about, well, when we investigated you before, Harry, you just cooperated 100%, gave us everything. What do you plan to do this time? And I said, well, it'll be a little different now. The gentleman at the end of the table is my lawyer, and we'll see where this goes from here with him. And they said, well, AAPOR counsel is going to meet tomorrow, and so we'll call you and let you know. So the next afternoon I was called, and they said AAPOR decided to drop. At that time, to cover themselves, that we suit the individuals would be responsible rather than AAPOR itself. Subsequently, AAPOR got the necessary kind of insurance to cover situations like that. So I've had my run-ins with AAPOR early on because you always upset somebody when you do advocacy research. Somebody else is going to be gored, as I said, and they're not going to agree. The other interesting thing is, a couple of years ago, I chaired the subcommittee at AAPOR that reviewed our standard of ethics, and I thought that was a lot of fun. That I was their first ethics case, and now I was reviewing our standards, which went well.
Okay, and you did some work with the White House.
Well, that was the Nixon time where we constantly were interviewing for the
that was on issues during this period. You were working with
every 2 weeks.
David Gergen then?
Yeah.
Okay, you've been conducting research for litigation for over 20 years. Would you tell us about that experience?
Well, that's a lot of fun, too. As I said, basically I did trademark confusion and misleading advertising. And it's amazing how many trademarks are out there or want to be out there that are similar to a trademark that's already been registered with the trademark office. So a company will say, you know, we've had this trademark for some time, we want to maintain it, and we don't want anybody else using it. So it was early on in survey research in the legal field that it was tough to get accepted because it was hearsay. You know, when you're testifying in court, you can only testify about those things that you've done and talked about. You can't say, somebody told me something, because that's hearsay. So in a survey, of course, you ask other people, and they tell you something, and you accumulate their points of view to come up with your report. And so a lot of, early on, survey research had a very difficult time getting accepted in court because of the hearsay rule. Well, that changed, and now survey research was very acceptable. As a matter of fact, judges would say to lawyers on a trademark case, you better come into court with a survey to show if people are being confused. So we would go out and survey people to find out if this trademark in their mind was associated with the client's products or with other products. And if it was really associated only with the client's products, that was fine. But if they were also associated with others, if you had 15% or more of the public you interviewed saying that that trademark belonged to another set of products, that was enough to take to court and say, look, there is significant trademark confusion out there.
Stand by. Back on the video, good. Okay.
Harry, can we go back for a minute and talk a little about the some of the political research when you were doing it for Goldwater and for Nixon? How was it different, or wasn't it, back then in the way you dealt with the politicians and leaders you were working with? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's a big difference, I think, from when we worked for Goldwater and Nixon and what happened subsequently and today. We really didn't meet with either Goldwater or Nixon personally. I think we had one meeting with Goldwater, and that was all, and never with Nixon himself, always with the people involved in the campaign and so forth. And looking back on that, I'd say we were really outside, objective, third-party people, doing the research without being emotionally involved, if you will, and giving them the results and letting them spin it internally and so forth to suit their purposes. Whereas now the pollsters become strategists as well as pollsters. They meet and are very close to their clients. I'm just reading Dick Worthland's book, as a matter of fact, and it's a wonderful little book to read about his experiences with Reagan. He met in his home. He met with him in the Oval Office, one-on-one. He was on Air Force One with him. I think, and he handled it very well, don't get me wrong, and Teeter handled his relationship with President Ford very well. But there is the temptation, I think, if you're also the strategist and also that close, to get too involved as the people running the campaign are involved. And there's the possibility that you can lose your objectivity, your outside objectivity, because you're too close inside. And people have said to me when I made that comment, well, that's just sour grapes, Harry, because they have a better relationship than you all did. But I still believe that. I think the pollsters should be an objective outside party and not get too emotionally involved and too close in with the candidate. It works very well for some people, as I said, with Teeter and Worthland, but Cadell was a case where I don't think it worked very well. That was the first time, as I recall, that the pollster stepped inside the campaign itself and was close to the candidate, met with the candidate, and I think Cadell got too wrapped up. The one thing that comes to me is when Carter gave his speech on malaise in the general public and so forth. Now, none of our research that we did, not for Carter, but just generally research that we were doing during the campaign for our own purposes, our own use, showed that the public was really feeling this malaise. They were upset with Carter. They didn't think he was doing a good job. But he gets on television and turns that around to where he's basically criticizing the public and not suggesting that the public is upset with him, which is why they're having the points of view that they have. So I think it is dangerous. So far it hasn't been, but I think it really could be.
Okay, you've talked about some of your political research and your litigation research. Are there other research projects, thinking back, that were especially enjoyable to you?
Well, yeah, there were some. The one that was really enjoyable, and you know because you worked with me on it, Ms. Daniels, was the work we did after the Exxon Valdez oil spill, where we were hired by the Department of Justice to find out what people thought about that, how upset they were about that, and we got involved in a whole another kind of research that very few of my colleagues that I've talked to have ever done, and that's called contingent valuation research, where there is a problem and you ask people what it'd be worth to them to clear up the problem, or what it'd be worth to them to have them paid something in lieu of clearing up the problem. For instance, if you live in a fairly small town that has a lake, and the lake has been polluted by a company in the area or something, you want to know from the people, what would it take? How much would they be willing to pay to clear up the pollution in the lake? And there are different levels. You could clear up the pollution to the point where you could take a little rowboat out on it, but nothing else. You could clear it up to the point that, well, you can do that, but you can also swim in it. Or you can also fish in it and eat the fish safely. All different levels that you could clean up the lake to. And what would people be willing to pay to have the lake cleaned up at those different levels? That's contingent valuation. Or how much money would they be willing to accept to live with a polluted lake? They couldn't do anything with it, but would they be willing to live that way if they got paid a certain amount of money? Maybe their taxes lowered or something. So this is contingent valuation research. You don't hear much about it anymore, I don't think. And we did a lot of that for the Justice Department in the Exxon Valdez case. We were working on a variety of questionnaires. I think we were testing 8 different forms of the questionnaire. The goal was eventually to do a broad national study with a large sample with one of the forms of the questionnaire, so we could say this is what the public at large would either be willing to pay or willing to accept to clean up Prince Edward Island area where the Exxon Valdez oil spill was. Unfortunately, we never got to that point because after all the pre-testing, everything we had been doing for months, they settled the case and the Justice Department didn't need any more research. It was good that they settled the case, I suppose, but not for us because we were looking forward to doing a really major study. It would have been the first major national contingent valuation study, and we never got a chance to do it. I also had some interesting experiences elsewhere. We were we were owned at one time when I was with ORC by Arthur D. Little, a consulting company. And they had they were working for the government of Iran. And so they asked us to join with them to do some research over there. And I went over to Iran for about a week, week and a half, and wrote a proposal for a big employee study. Why an employee study? Well, it'd been the habit in Iran for bright people graduating from the universities and so forth to go to work for the government. That was the prime employer that they wanted to work for. But there were a lot of private companies in Iran then. This was during the days of the Shah, by the way, not under Khomeini. And there was more and more of the good students taking jobs in the private sector rather than in the government or the public sector. And the Shah wanted to know what was the big attraction in the private sector rather than going to work for the public sector. So I was over there meeting with the people involved, and at the end of my week, 10 days, I was to have a proposal to present to the government, and I wrote it, presented it, and the government said, fine, we want to do this study. Then the Shah was overthrown, and so the study never went. But it was a very interesting project to work on up through the proposal stage, and it was very interesting to see how things were in Iran then compared to what happened later. Quite different. I was working, actually the people I was working directly for was the radio and television agency, whatever they called it at the time, and the guy I was really reporting to didn't speak English, but there was a very, very bright female researcher who was assigned to me, who spoke French, Farsi, which is the Iranian language, and English. She was educated partially in Iran and partially in the United Kingdom, and she was very bright, very fluent in all three languages. So we worked together, and it was interesting to work with an interpreter throughout all of this too. The other study that was very much fun that never got anywhere either was in Nigeria, and this is when Nigeria was not like it is today, not under a dictator, but they had a democracy. They had a constitution based on ours. They had state governments with their own constitutions, and they elected their president and so forth. And there was, I think, a year and a half, 2 years down the road was going to be the next election for president. So they wanted a proposal for us to come in and train interviewers, get them set up to draw a sample of the country, and do surveys all throughout the campaign toward the upcoming election. And what we would develop was really a turnkey operation. When the election was over, we would turn over to this private group an ongoing research function that had interviewers trained, that had samples set up, and other people trained to write questionnaires and so forth. So we did the proposal, put a price on it, and we had one thing that we said had to happen. They had to give a letter of credit with the money backing it to a bank in the United States, so that when we started, we could present monthly invoices to the bank and be paid. And they said, fine, we'll do that. Well, Nigeria, you know, at least at that time, was primarily an oil-based economy. And things sort of went to hell in the handbasket with the oil. That was during the time then where people were in gas lines here and so forth. And the Iranian government said, no more money is to go out of the country. So the money could not be sent over to a bank here with a letter of credit, and that study went down the tube too. So two very fascinating studies that I worked on through the proposal stage, through no fault of mine, went down the tube, and then their government got overthrown too by the military. So after that, two countries went down the tube after I was there, and they were hesitant to send me to another country. I was sent, however, to Ukraine for the Freedom House. And the Freedom House, as you may know, is an organization that is very much involved in democracies in foreign countries and so forth. And my assignment over there, which was for about a week, was to meet with basically their political reporters and so forth, and teach their reporters what political research was all about, and how, as journalists, they should present the findings of a political study. So you weren't just throwing out a lot of numbers, but you were saying what they meant and so forth, and the reasons behind them. And I had a fun week of meeting with a lot of journalists, giving a couple of lectures with an interpreter to journalists, which was kind of neat too. If you give a speech and there has to be somebody sitting next to you who you have to stop every now and then, he translates it into Ukrainian. That was fun. And there was no research involved per se, but there was a lot of fun working with political journalists in how to deal with and communicate political research to the public. So they were three very, very interesting jobs. Although they never came to research fruition, they were certainly fun to work on and work with.
You've worked in a lot of countries. I think you did some work in Mexico, too, didn't you?
Yeah, well, we had an office in Mexico at one point, and so I worked closely with them. I was on the board of that Mexican company. We also had a company in Canada, ORC did, and I was on the board of that company. And then my research has taken me into a lot of different countries, Brazil and Venezuela, Italy, England, Holland, Sweden. So that's another reason I kind of like this work. And this was before everybody and his brother had a global company. You didn't do all that much research overseas, but I had the opportunity then to travel to 6, 8 countries and do research that I would not have had a chance to do had I not been in this business. And this was before being global was the thing to do.
And you did some work for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I really didn't do the research for them, but we had something at ORC called the Public Opinion Index, which we produced a monthly report on all different kind of subjects, relating to business primarily, because the clients for this index were all major companies. And at that time, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce had a large television studio, and they had a program on called Nation's Business Today. It was on every day, and I was retained by them to appear once a week to discuss the results of a particular piece of research that ORC had already done relating to business and what its implications for business were. And that lasted for several years until the program itself was canceled. Not just the segment I did, but the whole program was canceled. And that was very interesting and a lot of fun too. Particularly if you're a ham, you know, you can get on television. I think this is just a reminiscence. It's a wonderful industry to work in because of the variety of things that you get to do and the kinds of people you get to meet. And I think the people that work in our business, the people that you'll meet at AAPOR, are probably some of the most decent, ethical people that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. And the whole industry is that way. I've been involved in a lot of organizations in our industry, and they've all been outstanding in terms of what you learn and in terms of the people you meet, and the fact that these people are very interested in doing quality work and ethical work. I've been in CASRO since it was founded. ORC was one of the founding companies of the Council of American Survey Research Organizations, and I was chairman of that for a year, and I've been on different committees and so forth there. The Market Research Council, which meets once a month in New York and listens to presentations of interesting kinds of research. For 10 years, I was president of the National Council on Public Polls, which is made up of research firms that do political and other publicly released data. And our major function there was to deal with journalists and train journalists in how they should report surveys. And as I say, I was president of that for 10 years. I was fortunate enough, the AMA, the American Marketing Association, has a research division. And when Bill Neal was the executive director that year, he thought the AMA, which publishes things like the Journal of Marketing and so forth, but those journals were very erudite, and they were really meant for academics in the field and very experienced researchers. They weren't doing anything for junior researchers. And Bill's thought that the AMA ought to have a publication that was geared to marketing research for junior level people. And Bill asked me if I'd be willing to take on the task of founding such a journal, which I said yes, I'd be happy to, although who knows, I had never done anything like that before, but it was fun. I got together a very good editorial board, founded the journal, and it was a quarterly at that time, and I edited that journal for its first 5 years. And we had people writing for it in English. I remember putting out the rules for authors that said the first rule was this journal is meant to be read and understood, not deciphered, to distinguish it from the Journal of Marketing and some others. And that was a kind of an interesting experience, too. I got to know a lot of people, met a lot of people that I invited to write for it and so forth. And I also worked on the Council of Marketing and Opinion Research, which was charged with trying to improve the response rates that we have now problems with. And I was on their board for a while, too. And the Research Industry Coalition was founded because we have so many associations in our field of survey research. We thought we ought to have a coalition where all these 18 or 20 of these associations would get together regularly to talk about the issues that needed to be brought back to their association that were industry issues, and why were response rates lower? What are some of the ethical things that we may not consider? And so we thought we would deal with all of these, and then the representatives would take these things back to their particular associations. And that was in effect for quite a few years. I think we finally decided that our goal had been met, that we had brought all these associations kind of up to par in their sensitivity to the issues that we're facing the industry. And I was also a member of the board of the Marketing Research Institute International, which works with the University of Georgia, you may know, and it sponsors and puts on a marketing research course on the internet for basically entry-level people and so forth, so they can take this marketing research course. And it's a very good course that covers the whole area of marketing research, but they can take it at their own speed, their own time on the internet. And that has been a very, very successful program. I think that probably covers my activities. They've been varied there too, and very enjoyable, and has allowed me to meet a lot of very wonderful people.
You've been a member of AAPOR for more than 40 years.
Yeah.
What role has AAPOR played in your career or your experiences?
Well, it's been a place where, as I said, I've gotten to meet people that I never would have met before. Kind of ordinary folk, but also the names that you hear about. Guys who write books that you read, and people whose names are very well known. And that's been very important to me. And I've always been concerned with the ethics of the business. And I like the fact that we have that good set of standards, which I've talked about before. But it's those kinds of things that I've really enjoyed about AAPOR. But that took a while. AAPOR has changed over the years, too, and very much for the better. When I first went to AAPOR, it had to be, in the early 60s or very late 70s, and a newcomer would come to AAPOR. It was much smaller than it is now, but still sizable. But it was run by an in-group. And by God, that in-group held themselves up here, and everybody else was down there, and you never really got a chance to meet with them. They had a big party on Saturday night, and now the president's cocktail party everybody goes to. Theirs was a very select little group. And I spent 3 or 4 days at AAPOR and came back, and I said they were 3 or 4 of the worst days of my life. And that continued for a few years. And finally, the message got through to the people running AAPOR that they shouldn't be so damn elitist anymore, and they ought to mix and have everybody get to know each other. And they've come a long way from that. The president's cocktail party is for everybody. There's a newcomers party. There's mentors. They've done all kinds of things over the years to encourage junior people to come, to be integrated with everybody else. And as a result, AAPOR has been more fun in that regard, as well as, of course, what you learn at AAPOR is very important too, because the sessions we're to the point now where we have too many sessions, and they compete with each other. And there may be 3 things going on at the same time that you want to see. You can only see one. But, of course, there's a lot of variety to choose from, and you can learn an awful lot through AAPOR. And now that they have their courses that they offer, that's a big advantage for people that want to learn specific things. So AAPOR has come a long way, both in enticing people to join, in treating them well when they do come to the meetings, and in providing a lot of intellectual stimulation.
Great. Thinking back over your career, back to the late 50s, what do you think are your most important contributions to research, to our field?
I've never developed a new methodology or a new statistical advance. Where I think I've had the most influence in my career is I have taught at Rutgers and a couple of years with Mike Kagi at the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. But I've also been very tuned, I think, to working with junior staff and people like that. I've always been very interested in training junior staff, bringing them along, seeing that they were promoted, and giving them the benefit of whatever it is I can teach them. But also, I've tried to train them to be ethical people, and I've made that a big thing. Don't let clients run over you. Don't let them lead you to do things that you don't think are right. Have the backbone to stand up for what's ethical and quality, and I've been very much attuned to that, and that's the thing that I'm kind of most proud of, short of not inventing a whole new methodology.
And what is it, if you can identify this, that's kept you interested and involved in survey research over your long and active career?
Just the variety. The fact that you're never given a chance to be bored, at least I wasn't, because the research issues were all different. And when you got up in the morning and opened the newspaper and read about an issue, or maybe read about a new product, you related to it because you had something to do with working either on it or about it. And so the world becomes, I think, more interesting to you because of the work that you do, the variety of the work that you do. And it's just very, very fascinating stuff. I think other jobs would have bored me to tears. This never gave me the chance to be bored.
Stand by. Okay, good.
Thank you, Harry, so much for spending this time with us talking about this long career of yours. We'll miss you at the office now that you've retired, but it'll be so great to see you at AAPOR events over the coming years. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Okay, that was nice.